I remember the first time I stepped into the forest near the old National Park cabin. The fog clung to the trees like a living thing, curling around each trunk in quiet, pale spirals. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom, and every rustle of leaves made my heart hitch in ways I couldn't explain. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic, like the forest itself was breathing. I had intended just a quiet weekend away, somewhere isolated, far from the hum of the city. But that night, as the wind whispered and the cabin creaked under the weight of shadows, I realized I was not alone. There were shapes moving just beyond the reach of the light, shapes that didn't belong. I froze, listening to a low, almost human growl, and the silence that followed was more suffocating than any sound could be. My mind tried to rationalize it. Deer, maybe a coyote, but the sense of being watched was too deliberate, too cold. That's when I saw it, standing just beyond the mist, perfectly still, watching me with eyes that weren't quite right, its head tilted in a way a human never could. And in that instant, I understood the forest held secrets it didn't want to leave with. I never should have opened the door. The trail was supposed to be empty this time of year. Late autumn, that thin space between warm afternoons and the first real cold. Pines crowded both sides of the path, tall and close, their needles dark with moisture. Fog slid between their trunks like breath escaping parted lips. It clung to my jacket, to my hair, cool, damp. Each step pressed softly into soil that smelled old and wet. Leaves broke down under my boots, releasing a quiet, sweet rot. The forest felt awake. Not loud, just listening. I told myself the whispers were wind, a trick of fog moving through branches. But the air was still, too still. Something murmured anyway. Low, unfocused. Not words. Not quite. I slowed without meaning to. My breath grew careful. Shallow. I didn't want it noticed. The fog thickened ahead, swallowing the trail inch by inch. Pale light filtered through it, thin and weak, like it had traveled too far to reach me. Every few steps, the forest shifted shape. A trunk leaned where it hadn't before. A branch dipped lower. That's when the shadow moved. Just once. Fast. Too fast to follow. It crossed between two trees ahead of me, darker than the fog, smoother than an animal's run. No sound followed it. No snap of branches. No scatter of leaves. My skin tightened along my arms. Cold spread up my spine. I stood still, listening. The forest answered with quiet. Not peace. Not calm. I held silence, like something waiting for me to decide. I took another step. Then another. The whispers returned, closer now, brushing the edges of my hearing. They slipped between the pines, circling, never settling in one place. Each breath I took carried a faint chill, sharp in my nose, metallic on my tongue. I felt watched. That sensation crawled across my shoulders, pressing between my shoulder blades. Eyes, many of them, focused. I turned slowly, fog curling around my boots. Tree trunks stood where they always had. Still, patient, nothing stared back. The path narrowed. Roots rose like knuckles through the soil. My foot caught once, then again, as if the ground had shifted under me. The forest smelled stronger here. Sap, mold, cold water. A soft rustling followed me. Not behind, not beside, everywhere at once. I stopped breathing for a moment, just to be sure. The rustling didn't stop. My heart tapped quietly against my ribs, steady but heavy. Each beat felt too loud, too exposed. Hello. The word barely left my mouth. It faded into the fog like it had never existed. The answer came as a whisper. Not my name. Not yet. Just a low exhale threaded through the trees. I moved again, faster this time. The fog parted reluctantly, dragging against my legs. Every few steps, I glanced to the side, convinced I'd catch something standing just out of sight. Sometimes I thought I did. A shape that straightened when I wasn't looking. A darker smear in the mist that vanished when I focused. The trail bent left, then right. The forest felt closer, crowded. Branches leaned inward, needles brushing my sleeves, leaving damp trails along my skin. The whispers grew quieter. That scared me more. Silence spread, heavy and complete. No birds. No insects. Even the wind seemed to pull away. I stopped again. The feeling of eyes returned. Stronger now. Closer. My breath fog in front of me. Blooming white before dissolving. The air tasted thin. Empty. Behind me. Something shifted. Slow. Careful. Not a step. Not quite. I didn't turn right away. My body refused. Muscles locked. Cold pooled at the base of my neck. When I finally looked, there was nothing there. Just fog. Just trees. But the silence stayed wrong. Too tight. Like it would shatter if I moved too suddenly. I stood alone on the trail, wrapped in pale mist, surrounded by watching shapes that never showed themselves. The forest held its breath. And somewhere behind me, just out of sight, something followed. The clearing appeared without warning. One step, I was surrounded by trees. The next, the forest opened its mouth. Fog thinned just enough to reveal a cabin hunched at the edge of the pines. Old wood, darkened by years of damp and cold. Its roof sagged slightly like a tired back. The air smelled different here. Less pine, more dust, old smoke that never fully left. I stopped at the tree-line. My boots sank into soft ground, soaked through with moisture. The fog drifted low, curling around the cabin's base as if trying to pull it under. That's when I noticed a light. A lantern flickered behind one of the front windows. Weak, unsteady, yellow against the gray. No trail led here. No tracks. No reason for anyone to be inside. The glass reflected the fog, bending it into warped shapes. Every flicker of light made the shadows inside stretch and recoil. Like something breathing just out of rhythm, the forest behind me felt farther away than it should have. Sound didn't travel back there anymore. Not even the quiet, rustling I'd grown used to. I stepped into the clearing. The ground changed under my feet. Harder, packed down by old footsteps that no longer existed. Each step echoed faintly, swallowed quickly by the fog. The lantern brightened for a moment, then dimmed. The cabin door faced me, slightly ajar. Just enough to notice. Just enough to suggest it had been opened recently. The smell of old wood grew stronger as I approached. Damp boards, mildew, something faintly sweet beneath it all, like rot hiding under varnish. A floorboard creaked inside, not beneath my feet. I froze. The sound came again, slow, measured, as if weight shifted from one foot to another. The lantern flickered harder now, shadows jumping along the walls. They didn't match the cabin's shape. Corners bent where they shouldn't. Lines stretched too long. I listened closely, my breath shallow, careful not to disturb the air. Another creak, closer to the window. The glass clouded briefly, fogging from the inside. A pale shape passed behind it. I took a step back without meaning to. My heels scraped against gravel, sharp and loud in the quiet. The shape stopped. The lantern went still. Silence pressed in, thick and heavy, wrapping around my ears. Even the fog seemed to pause, hanging motionless in the air. Then I saw it. A silhouette formed in the window. Vague. Humanoid. Too tall to be clear. Too thin to be solid. It didn't move. Didn't lean forward. Just stood there, dark against the weak light. I couldn't see a face. Only the suggestion of shoulders. A head tilted slightly, as if listening. My skin prickled, heat and cold colliding along my arms. I felt exposed, standing in the open like that. The silhouette faded suddenly, dissolving into shadow. The lantern flickered again, brighter this time, as if nothing had been there at all. The fog shifted behind me, not drifting, repositioning. I turned halfway, heart stuttering, but the clearing remained empty. Trees watching the edge, their trunks pale and tall. Still, silent. When I faced the cabin again, the door had opened wider. The gap was dark. Too dark. Cold air breathed out from inside, brushing my face and hands. It carried dust and something metallic, sharp enough to catch in my throat. I stepped closer. The porch boards groaned under my weight, complaining softly, like they hadn't been disturbed in a long time. Each sound felt amplified, echoing into places I couldn't see. The lantern inside swayed gently now. No chain moved it. No breeze reached it. Shadows slid across the floor, slow and deliberate. One stretched toward the doorway, stopping just short of the threshold. I stood there, close enough to feel the cold pouring from the darkness, close enough to smell the inside. Stale air, old breath. The forest behind me felt wrong. Too quiet, like it was waiting for me to make a choice. The cabin loomed, patient and still, its doorway open like an unblinking eye. The lantern flickered once more, light trembling across the walls. I hesitated at the threshold, fog curling around my boots, silence pressing against my ears. I couldn't tell if the cabin was shelter or an invitation. The door closed behind me with a sound too soft to trust. Inside, the cabin held its breath. Stale air pressed against my skin, warmer than the forest, thick with dust and old smoke. The lantern's glow trembled along the walls, casting pale light that never fully reached the corners. I lay down on a narrow bed pushed against the far wall. The mattress sighed under my weight. Springs complained quietly, then settled. What surrounded me, floorboards, ceiling beams, walls thin enough to listen through. The wind moved outside, brushing the cabin in long, careful strokes. It slipped through cracks and seams, carrying the scent of wet pine and cold earth. Each breath I took tasted faintly metallic, like the air had been disturbed too many times before. I closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come. The lantern flickered once, then steadied. Its light stretched shadows across the ceiling, pulling them longer than the room allowed. That's when I heard it, a low sound, drifting in through the trees. Not sharp, not loud, just deep enough to settle into my chest. A howl. It rose slowly, curling to the fog outside, thick and heavy. Not an animal call, not a warning. It carried intention. My eyes opened. The sound pressed against the cabin walls, vibrating through the wood beneath me. Each note lingered longer than it should have, dragging its echo behind it like a tail. I lay still, counted my breaths. In, out. The howl dipped, then rose again, closer this time. It didn't bounce through the forest the way sound should. It slid, smooth, controlled. The shadows on the walls responded. They stretched downward, pooling near the floor, then crept back up again. The lantern hadn't moved. The light remained steady. My heart tapped harder now, each beat syncing with the slow rhythm outside. Between howls, branches snapped, one by one, evenly spaced. Snap, pause, snap. Each break landed between my breaths. I pulled the thin blanket tighter, though the room felt warmer by the second. My skin prickled, a tight heat crawling up my arms and neck. Sweat gathered at my temples despite the cold air seeping through the walls. The howl stopped. Silence rushed in to fill the space it left behind. Not relief. Pressure. The forest went quiet in a way that felt deliberate. No wind. No movement. Just a soft creak of wood as the cabin adjusted around me. Then the shadows moved again. They slid across the walls, stretching unnaturally long, thinning into shapes that didn't belong to anything solid. One brushed the edge of the bed frame, lingering there. I didn't move. Outside, something stepped closer. Not heavy, not light, measured. The floorboards beneath me vibrated faintly, as if the ground itself reacted to the presence beyond the walls. My breath came shallow now, fogging faintly in the warm air. The howl returned, sudden and close. It rose directly outside the cabin, filling every crack and seam, forcing its way inside. The sound pressed against my ears, low enough to feel rather than hear. My chest tightened, each inhale scraped. Branches snapped again, this time right beside the wall. The rhythm matched my heartbeat too perfectly. The lantern flickered, just once. Shadows leapt violently, slamming into corners, climbing the ceiling. For a brief moment, the room looked wrong. Stretched, warped. I squeezed my eyes shut. The howl cut off mid-note, not fading, not trailing away. Stopped. Silence poured in, thick and absolute. It settled over the cabin like a weight, pressing down on the roof, the walls, my chest. I listened for breathing that wasn't mine. Nothing came. The branches outside stilled. The wind vanished. Even the fog seemed to pause. Time stretched then. I opened my eyes slowly. The lantern burned steady again. Shadows rested where they should. The room looked ordinary. Small, Still, but the air felt watched. I lay there, unmoving, counting the second between my breaths. My heartbeat refused to slow. Outside, something shifted once more, closer to the wall, close enough that I imagined I could feel its presence pressing through the wood. No sound followed, just the certainty that whatever had been there wasn't gone. The silence stayed, heavy and deliberate, wrapping around the cabin and everything inside it. And somewhere beyond the walls and the fog and the trees, something waited, patient. Morning never really arrived. The fog only thin enough to remind me it was still there. Pale light seeped through the trees, weak and directionless, like it didn't know where it belonged. The cabin behind me felt smaller now, less solid. The air was wet against my skin. Cold settled into my clothes, clinging to fabric and bone. Each breath tasted like damp leaves and something faintly bitter, almost electric. I stepped back onto the trail, if it was still a trail. Mist rolled low, thick enough to hide my boots after a few steps. The forest pressing close, trunks emerging and vanishing as I moved. Nothing stayed still long enough to trust. My footsteps sounded wrong, too soft, as if the ground absorbed them eagerly. I walked slowly, listening. Every movement felt louder than it should have. My jacket brushed against itself, whispering with each step. Somewhere nearby, something answered, not with sound, with presence. Shapes formed ahead of me, half built by fog and shadow. A bend in a tree looked like a shoulder. A cluster of branches bent into the shape of fingers. Each time I focused, the illusion slipped apart. I rubbed my hands together, feeling the chill bite into my palms. The fog beaded on my skin, cold and persistent. It felt alive, not moving randomly, adjusting. Eyes appeared between the trees, just reflections at first. Small, pale, they hovered low, then higher, blinking out when I turned my head too quickly. When I looked straight at them, they vanished. When I didn't, I felt them watching. My pace quickened without my permission. The forest smelled sharper here. Sap and wet bark. Old water trapped under soil. The scent clung to the back of my throat. Footsteps echoed mine. Not behind me. Beside me. I stopped. They stopped too. My breath fog thick in front of my face. I listened past it, past the blood rushing in my ears. The silence strained, like it was being held in place. I turned slowly. Nothing stood there. Only mist and tree trunks fading into gray. When I faced forward again, something had changed. A shape lingered near a wide tree ahead. Tall, too straight. It flickered, like a reflection in disturbed water. There 1 second, gone the next. My chest tightened. Cold crawled along my spine. I took a step back. The fog surged forward, swallowing the space I'd just vacated. It closed around my legs, thick and resistant, as if pushing against me. The footsteps returned. Closer now. Too close. I turned and ran. Branches lashed at my arms, cold needles scraping skin. The ground shifted underfoot, uneven and slick. My breath tore from my chest in shallow gasps. Fog bursting from my mouth in white clouds. The forest blurred. Trees leaned inward as I passed, shadows stretching long and thin, crossing the path ahead of me. The fog churned, rolling faster, rising higher, closing off every direction at once. Something moved between the trunks, not chasing, keeping pace. I glimpsed it only in fragments. A pale limb, a bend where a knee shouldn't bend, a head tilted at an angle that made my stomach drop. I didn't hear it breathe, didn't hear it step, but it was there. The mist thickened until the world shrank to a few feet in front of me. My legs burned. My lungs scraped raw with each inhale. I stumbled. Cold mud swallowed my hands as I caught myself, slick and smelling of rot. For a moment, I stayed there, heart hammering, listening. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed down hard, flattening everything. Even the fog seemed to pause, hanging unnaturally still. I pushed myself upright. That's when I felt it. A presence directly behind the tree to my right. So close the air felt warmer there. So close I could smell it. Damp fabric, old earth, something faintly sweet and wrong. The fog thinned just enough. A humanoid shape flickered into view. not fully formed, edges blurred. Its surface shimmered, as if it couldn't decide what it was meant to be. Pale eyes glowed faintly within the haze, unblinking, curious. I couldn't move. It leaned slightly, mirroring the angle of my head. No sound came from it. No breath disturbed the fog. Then it shifted, not forward, not back, sideways, and vanished. The mist surged again, thicker than before, rolling over the space it had occupied. The air dropped several degrees, all at once, cold snapping against my skin. I turned and ran again, blindly now, guided only by panic and instinct. The forest twisted around me, paths folded on themselves. Every direction felt wrong. The fog chased me, climbing higher, swallowing sound, swallowing distance. My own breathing felt foreign, too loud in my ears. Eventually, my legs gave out. I stopped, bent over, hands on my knees, gasping. The mist slowed, settled. Nothing followed, but the feeling remained. Eyes closed, patient. I straightened slowly, wiping cold moisture from my face. The forest stood quiet again, pretending nothing had happened. But the fog lingered, thick and watchful. And I knew, deep in my chest, that the mist had learned the shape of me. And it wasn't finished yet. The cabin came back into view without warning. One moment, fog and trees pressing from every side. The next, the clearing opened again, pale and wrong, like a memory I hadn't meant to return to. The structure looked unchanged. Same slanted roof. Same dark, which soaked with years of damp. But something about it felt occupied. Light moved behind the windows. Not steady lantern glow. Not flicker. Movement. Soft bands of pale light slid across the glass, bending and twisting as if reflected from water that wasn't there. They crossed rooms I hadn't entered yet. Rooms that should have been empty. The fog pooled low around the porch, thick enough to hide the cabin's foundation. It crawled instead of drifting, slow and deliberate. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. The forest behind me felt distant now, muted, like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. The scratching started softly. At first, it blended with the forest sounds I no longer trusted. A dry rasp. Fingernails dragged gently across wood. The cabin door. I didn't move. The scratching paused and resumed, slower this time. Careful. Testing. My breath came shallow, fogging in front of my face. The air smelled colder here. Metallic. Sharp enough to sting my nose. Light flared suddenly in the left window. A shadow passed behind the glass, long and thin, bending unnaturally as it moved. It didn't walk. It slid. I took a step closer before I realized I was moving. The porch boards groaned faintly under my weight. The sound carried too far, echoing into fog where it didn't belong. The scratching stopped. Silence rushed in, thick and heavy, pressing against my ears. The light inside shifted again, spilling briefly into the clearing before retreating. That's when I noticed the second window, the one on the far side. Light flickered there too. I hadn't gone into that room. I knew I hadn't. My stomach tightened. Shadows danced across the glass in broken patterns, stretching into shapes that didn't resemble anything solid. They overlapped, separating and reforming, like reflections from a fire that wasn't burning. The fog behind me shifted, not drifting, rearranging. I stood frozen between the forest and the cabin, caught in a space that didn't feel meant for me anymore. The scratching returned, louder now. The sound dragged slowly downward, from the center of the door to just above the floor, wood fibers complained softly under the pressure. I told myself not to look. I looked anyway. The door didn't move. No handle turned. No gap widened. Just the sound, persistent, patient. Light flared in the window, directly in front of me, and for a fraction of a second, I saw it. A figure stood just behind the glass. Humanoid, tall, its outline blurred, like it didn't fully exist in this light. Pale skin caught the lantern glow, too smooth, almost reflective. Its head tilted slightly, mirroring the way I leaned forward, without realizing it. No eyes were visible. Then they were. 2 pale points bloomed where a face should have been, faint but unmistakable. They didn't blink, didn't move. The figure vanished instantly, dissolving into shadow and fog. The light inside went still. My heart slammed hard against my ribs, each beat echoing in my ears. Cold crept along my arms, raising bumps across my skin. The scratching stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. The fog resumed its slow crawl. The forest exhaled faintly, leaves rustling far away. I waited for relief. It didn't come. Instead, the cabin felt closer somehow, larger, as if the walls had shifted while I wasn't looking. The door creaked softly, not opening, settling. A quiet thump followed, somewhere inside the cabin. Then another. Slow footsteps crossed the floor behind the walls, deliberate and unhurried. They didn't match the size of the structure. Too long between steps. I backed away from the porch, my boots sinking slightly into damp earth. The fog curled tighter around my ankles, resisting each step. Light flickered again in the far window. This time, the shadow lingered. I caught the curve of a shoulder, the suggestion of an arm lifting. Something pressed close to the glass from the inside. A hand, not quite right, fingers too long, joints bending where they shouldn't. It rested there, unmoving, as if feeling the barrier between us. Then it slid down slowly and disappeared. The light dimmed. Darkness reclaimed the cabin, leaving only the faint glow from the lantern in the main room. I stood there, shaking slightly, breath uneven, unable to tear my eyes away. The forest behind me felt wrong again. Too quiet, too distant. I understood then. Whatever had been following me through the fog, whatever had learned my shape, was no longer outside, and the cabin wasn't shelter. It was already occupied. The clearing fell silent once more, fog drifting lazily across the ground. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, I wasn't alone anymore. The trail didn't look broken at first. Just older, overgrown, like it had been forgotten on purpose. Tall grass leaned inward, brushing my legs with cold. Wet fingers, thorns snagged at my sleeves. The air felt heavier here, thick with fog, and something faintly electrical that made my teeth ache. I followed it anyway. The cabin stayed behind me, swallowed quickly by mist. Its shape blurred, then vanished, like it had never existed at all. That should have frightened me more than it did. The ground softened underfoot. Mud pulled gently at my boots, reluctant to let go. Each step left a clear print behind me, edges sharp and dark with water. I watched them form, one after another. Then I noticed the others. Footprints appeared ahead of me, in the mud. Fresh, deep, they didn't match mine. The size was wrong. Too narrow, the stride too long. I stopped walking. The fog shifted around my legs, cool and damp, clinging like breath held too close. The forest smelled of wet earth and crushed leaves, sharp enough to sting my nose. Slowly I turned. My footprints faded. Not slowly, not naturally. They filled in as if pressed flat by invisible hands, mud smoothing itself until the trail behind me looked untouched, like I had never passed through it all. Cold spread through my chest. I looked forward again. The other footprints remained. They led deeper into the trees. A sense of wonder crept in alongside the fear. Not comfort, recognition. As if the forest was showing me something on purpose. I followed. The fog thickened with every step, dulling sound, softening edges. Trees leaned closer together here. Trunks pale and slick with moisture. Their bark smelled faintly sweet, almost metallic. Movement flickered at the edge of my vision. Always just ahead, never still long enough to focus on. Sometimes I thought I saw a shoulder turn, sometimes the bend of a back. Each glimpse vanished the moment I tried to look directly at it. The footprints curved around trees, crossed shallow dips in the earth, then straightened again. They never hesitated, never wandered. Mine followed behind, briefly, then disappeared. Again and again, the realization settled slowly. I was leaving no trace. The forest absorbed me completely. A low hum crept into the air, subtle enough to mistake for blood rushing in my ears. It vibrated through the ground, through my boots, into my bones. Each step I took matched its rhythm. I breathed slower, trying not to draw attention to myself. The fog responded, thickening, sliding closer to my face. It smelled faintly of damp fabric and old wood. The footprints ahead began to blur, not fading, stretching, their edges smeared into long, dark lines, as if something had dragged itself forward instead of walking. The stride lengthened impossibly. I felt eyes on me again, from every direction, not hostile, curious. The trail narrowed until it barely existed, grass swallowing the path completely, branches arched overhead, knitting together, blocking what little light filtered through the fog. The hum deepened. I slowed, heart thudding softly in my chest. Each beat echoed too clearly, like the forest could hear it. Something moved just ahead. I saw it clearly this time. A figure, tall, slender. Its outline shimmered, edges rippling like heat above pavement. It moved without sound, gliding between the trees, always one step ahead. I stopped. The figure stopped too. It didn't turn around. It didn't need to. The fog shifted, curling tighter around us both. The air felt warmer near it, charged. I swallowed, throat dry. The footprints ended at its feet. No return marks. No sign it had ever turned back. Slowly, the figure stepped forward again. The trail bent sharply, looping back on itself, though I was certain it hadn't curved that way before. Trees rearranged subtly, trunks sliding into new positions when I wasn't looking directly at them. I followed without choosing to. The forest felt vast now, endless. Every clearing looked the same. The hum softened, blending with my breathing until I couldn't tell which was which. Fog brushed my face, cool and intimate, as if learning the shape of my features. The figure ahead never looked back, but I felt its attention on me all the same. I stumbled once, catching myself on a tree trunk slick with moisture. The bark felt warmer than it should have, almost alive. When I looked up, the figure was closer, too close. Just a few steps ahead now, its back turned, head tilted slightly, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. I froze, the forest still with me. No wind, no rustle. Even the hum faded to a thin, trembling thread. The figure shifted its weight. For a moment, I thought it might turn around. Instead, it stepped forward and vanished into the fog. The trail ended abruptly. Grass gave way to bare earth, smooth and undisturbed. No footprints, no path, just trees arranged in a wide circle, their trunks evenly spaced, watching. I stood alone in the center, breath shallow, heart racing. The fog closed in, sealing the space. And somewhere just beyond my sight, I knew the figure was still there, always one step ahead, guiding me through a forest that no longer needed paths at all. Night settled without warning. One moment, the sky held a dull gray. The next, darkness pressed down to the trees, thick and absolute. The cabin's shape waited ahead, barely visible through fog, its outline softer than it should have been. I stayed close to it, not inside, not far. A small pond rested just beyond the back wall, its surface smooth and black, swallowing what little light remained. Mist hovered low above the water, breathing slowly, rising and falling. The air smelled cold here, clean at first, then faintly sour like metal left in rain. I stepped carefully, boots sinking slightly into damp earth. Each movement felt too loud, too sharp against the stillness. My breath fogged, drifting upward before dissolving. That's when I saw them. Eyes. They reflected from the water's edge, scattered among reeds and low branches. Small at first, then more appeared. They didn't blink. Pale light caught in them, holding steady no matter how I shifted. The reflections didn't ripple with the water. They remained fixed. My chest tightened. I counted them without meaning to. Lost track almost immediately. The pond smelled deeper now. Stagnant. Old. I took a step back. The eyes followed the movement. Not turning, adjusting. A whisper brushed past my ear. Soft. Close. My name. It wasn't spoken. It was shaped. Formed by breath that wasn't mine. I froze, heart hammering, skin prickling from my neck down my arms. The fog thickened around the pond, muffling everything except my breathing. I waited for it to come again. It did. My name, stretched slightly longer this time, carried on a thin exhale that smelled of cold water and damp leaves. I swallowed hard, throat dry. Hello. The word barely left my lips, vanishing into the mist. The eyes didn't move. The whisper came from a different direction now. Behind me, then to my left. Always close. Never visible. I turned slowly, scanning the fog, the trees, the dark shape of the cabin. Nothing stood there. When I faced the pond again, one pair of eyes was closer. Too close. They hovered just above the water's surface, pale and unblinking, reflecting my own shape back at me in a warped, broken way. My breath hitched. The fog parted slightly. A shape rose from the edge of the pond. Humanoid, thin. Its outline shimmered like heat, edges soft and uncertain. Water dripped from it, though no ripples spread beneath. The smell shifted, cold iron and wet earth. I took a step back. The shape didn't follow. Instead, it tilted its head, mirroring me exactly. The eyes remained fixed, pale and empty, set too far apart. The whisper came again, closer, right behind my ear. My name, spoken with familiarity that made my stomach twist. I spun around. Nothing. When I turned back, the pond was empty. No eyes, no shape, just dark water. Smooth and still, mist drifting lazily above it. Silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. I stood there, shaking slightly, breath shallow, listening for anything that didn't belong. The cabin creaked faintly behind me. With adjusting, settling, I backed away from the pond slowly, never taking my eyes off the water. Each step felt wrong, like I was leaving something unfinished. The fog followed me, curling around my legs, brushing my hands. When I reached the cabin wall, I stopped. The silence remained, too complete. No insects, no wind, not even the soft rustling I'd grown to fear. I leaned my forehead briefly against the cold wood, grounding myself in its rough texture. My breath trembled. Behind me, from the direction of the pond, something exhaled, soft, satisfied. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. The silence told me enough. Whatever watched me from the water hadn't left. It had simply learned patience. And it knew my name. The lantern lit itself. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even crossed the room. One moment the cabin sat in gray half-dark, fog pressing at the windows. The next, pale flame bloomed behind the glass, steady and calm, like it had always been waiting. Warmth spread slowly, unevenly. The air near the ceiling stayed cold, while heat settled low around my legs. Dust drifted through the light, floating too slowly, as if the room resisted gravity. I stood near the door, fingers numb listening. The lantern hummed, not loud, not mechanical, a low vibration that slipped under my skin and rested in my chest. It matched my breathing at first, then fell slightly out of sync. Shadows stretched across the walls. They didn't follow the lantern's position. They twisted independently, bending around corners, thinning into shapes that didn't belong to furniture or beams. The walls smelled old, dry rot, and damp would layered together. Beneath it, something faintly sweet, like fabric stored too long in the dark. I stepped forward. The floorboard sighed under my weight, a tired sound, resigned. The hum deepened in response, vibrating through the soles of my boots. Objects felt closer than they should have. The table leaned inward. The chair's shadow crept along the wall, growing taller without moving. I told myself not to look too long. When I glanced away and back again, the chair had shifted, only a few inches, enough to notice. The hum pulsed. My breath fogged faintly, though the room felt warmer now. The air tasted stale, tinged with metal, like something had been disturbed recently. I crossed the room slowly. Each step seemed to echo twice, once on the floor, once from somewhere deeper, beneath the cabin. The lantern's light flickered, shadows shuddering violently for a heartbeat before settling again. For a moment, they formed shapes along the wall, elongated figures, thin and warped, standing shoulder to shoulder. I blinked. They unraveled, melting back into harmless darkness. The hum continued. Soft footsteps followed me. Not behind, not ahead, around. They brushed the edges of the room, circling, careful not to cross into the light. I stopped walking. They stopped too. The silence between us felt deliberate, I swallowed, throat dry, and shifted my weight. The table creaked. A small object slid across its surface. I hadn't touched it. The sound was subtle, wood on wood, but it cut through the hum sharply. I stared at the table, heart tapping unevenly. A book rested near the edge now, one I was certain hadn't been there before. Its cover was dark, swollen slightly with moisture. No title, no markings. I didn't open it. The lantern brightened. Shadows rushed outward, slamming into the corners of the room. The walls stretched, bowing outward slightly, like the cabin had taken a deeper breath. Something brushed my arm. Cold, brief. I flinched back, heart racing, but nothing stood there. Just empty air, faintly warmer where it had passed. The hum changed. It dipped lower, slower, vibrating through my teeth and jaw. I felt in my ears, just on the edge of hearing. I turned toward the hallway. A door stood there. I was certain it hadn't before. Plain wood, unpainted, its surface darker than the surrounding walls, as if it absorbed light rather than reflected it. The lantern flickered again. The shadows leaned toward the door. I took a step back. The floor creaked in protest. The hum surged briefly, then steadied, like a breath being controlled. The door remained closed. I waited. Time stretched in, elastic, losing shape. Then the door moved. Not opening. Not yet. It shuddered once, as if touched from the other side. The air near it cooled sharply, my breath fogging thicker. The smell changed, colder, damp fabric, something faintly sweet and wrong. The hum softened, sinking into a low murmur that felt almost soothing. Almost. The door creaked. Slowly, reluctantly, it began to close. I stared, frozen, as the narrow gap narrowed further. The hinges complained softly, stretching the sound out like it didn't want the moment to end. The lantern dimmed. Shadows stretched long and thin, reaching toward the door, toward me, trembling with anticipation. My heart pounded too loud now. Each beat echoed in the small space, bouncing off walls that felt closer than before. The door continued its slow movement. No hand touched it. No breeze stirred the air. Just steady, patient motion. I took a step forward without meaning to. The floor responded with a sharp creak, snapping the silence. The hum spiked violently, rattling the glass in the lantern. The door paused. For one terrible second, it felt like the cabin was listening. Then the door resumed. The gap vanished. Was met with a soft, final sound. The hum stopped. Not fading, not drifting away. Gone. The lantern burned steady once more. Shadows fell back into their proper places. The room looked ordinary again. Too ordinary. I stood there, breath shaking, skin prickled with cold despite the warmth. The silence pressing hard, heavier than any sound. Slowly, I realized something else. The door hadn't closed on its own. It had closed as if someone inside had finished watching. And whatever had been moving through the cabin, whatever had learned how the light worked, was now somewhere I couldn't see, waiting, just out of reach of the lantern's glow. The sound came from above me, soft at first, easy to dismiss. A faint rustle pressed through the ceiling, like fabric dragged slowly across wood. The lantern's glow trembled slightly, reacting before I did. I stood still, listening. The cabin smelled warmer now. Stale heat, trapped in old boards. Something faintly human beneath it. Sweat, breath. The rustling returned, heavier this time. A floorboard complained overhead, a long, aching groan that stretched too far. The sound didn't belong to an empty space. My eyes drifted to the ceiling. Dust sifted down in a thin line, catching the lantern light as it fell. It landed on my jacket, warm to the touch. I swallowed. The staircase waited at the far end of the room, narrow and steep. I hadn't noticed it before. I was sure of that. Its steps climbed into darkness, edges rounded smooth from years of use that shouldn't have existed. The air around it felt different, thicker, charged. Another movement came from above. Slow, deliberate. It shifted its weight. The sound carried intention. My breath felt loud now, fogging faintly despite the heat. The lantern hummed again, low and uneasy, as if reluctant to light what waited above. I told myself to stay where I was. My feet moved anyway. Each step toward the stairs made the cabin feel smaller. Walls leaned inward. Shadows stretched just ahead of me, always arriving first. The bottom step creaked when I touched it. The sound climbed upward, echoing into the dark space above. Silence answered. I took another step. The wood felt warmer here. Not from age. From something that had been there recently. The smell changed as I climbed. Dust gave way to fabric. Old cloth. Something faintly sweet and wrong beneath it. Halfway up, I stopped. The air pressed down from above, heavy against my face. My ears popped slightly, like pressure shifting. The rustling came again. Closer now, directly above my head. I raised the lantern slowly. Light crawled up the stairwell, revealing a low ceiling and a single door at the top. Its wood was darker than the rest of the cabin, swollen and uneven. Heat bled through its seams. The lantern flickered, then steadied. I climbed the last step. The attic door stood inches from my face. Close enough to smell it. Dry wood. Old breath. I rested my hand on the handle. It was warm. Not sun-warmed. Not lantern-warmed. Alive warm. My fingers twitched away instinctively, heart tapping unevenly in my chest. The hum deepened, vibrating through the handle, through my bones. I listened. Nothing moved now. No rustling. No shifting weight. Only my breathing and the low vibration filling the small space. I opened the door. The attic was empty. No furniture. No boxes. Just bare floorboards and angled beams disappearing into shadow. The lantern's light spread thinly, swallowed by the space. The air was thick with warmth. Unnatural warmth. It wrapped around me immediately, clinging to my skin, fogging my vision slightly. Sweat broke along my spine, despite the cold that had followed me all night. The floorboards here were dry, smooth, as if something had been pacing them recently. I stepped inside. The attic smelled wrong. Not rot, not mold, something human adjacent. Clothes worn too long. Breath held in close spaces. The door closed behind me. Hard. The sound cracked through the attic, sharp and final, rattling the beams overhead. Dust burst from the corners, drifting slowly through the lantern light. I spun around. The door didn't budge. No handle on this side. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears. I pressed my palm against the wood. Cold now. Dead. The lantern hummed louder, its vibration frantic, uneven. Shadows leapt along the slanted walls, stretching and collapsing in quick, nervous motions. The warmth intensified. I wiped sweat from my brow, fingers shaking. That's when I noticed it. The floor near the far corner. A darker patch of wood. Not a stain. Not moisture. Heat shimmered above it, warping the air. The boards there looked slightly bowed, as if something beneath them pressed upward. I took a cautious step closer. The floor creaked softly in response, a warning sound that echoed too long. The warmth pooled around my ankles now. It smelled stronger here. Fabric, skin. Something shifted in the corner of my vision. I froze. The lantern's light flickered violently, shadows slamming into the walls. For a moment, the attic looked crowded, full. I turned my head slowly. Nothing stood there, but the warmth moved. It slid across the floor, leaving no mark, stopping just behind me, close enough that the hairs on my arms lifted all at once. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My breath came shallow and fast, fogging faintly in the overheated air. The lantern's hum wavered, dropping in pitch until it felt like pressure inside my skull. A shape formed briefly in the far corner. Not solid, just a bend in the shadows where they shouldn't bend. Too tall, too narrow. It leaned. The attic creaked under its weight. I stumbled back, heart slamming hard enough to hurt. My heel caught the edge of a floorboard. The shape vanished instantly, snapping back into empty space. The warmth retreated. Silence rushed in, heavy and complete. The attic stood empty again. Just beams. Just dust. I pressed myself against the door, hands searching for a handle that wasn't there. My breath shook, loud and uneven. The lantern steadied. Shadows returned to their corners. Nothing moved, but the floor beneath me stayed warm, as if whatever had been up here hadn't left. It had only stepped aside. And it was waiting for me to realize I wasn't alone in the dark anymore. The mirror caught my eye first. I hadn't noticed it before, though the cabin had been full of them. Thin, tall, framed in dark wood. The glass slightly warped with age. It reflected more than the room, or at least it seemed to. I stepped closer. The air felt heavier near it. Cold pulled around my feet, while the warmth of the cabin lingered at my shoulders. Dust floated lazily in the faint lantern light, caught between reflection and reality. That's when I saw it. A figure standing behind me. Tall, shadowed, still. I froze. My breath caught. The hairs along my neck lifted. I turned. Nothing. The space behind me held only the cabin's ordinary emptiness. No figure. No shadow. Only the faint smell of old wood and something iron-tinged, like blood long settled. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I stepped back. Closer. Closer again. The mirror reflected the figure still. Standing there. Watching. Motionless. It smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a human one. Slow, deliberate, stretching slightly beyond what should be possible. A grin that belonged to the shadows themselves. The door rattled softly behind me. I jumped, heart spiking. The frame shivered in its hinges. Wind? No. The air was still. I spun again. The figure vanished. Only the mirror betrayed its presence, pale and grinning, waiting. Fog pressed against the windows outside. Thick, dense, moving like liquid around the cabin. Shadows stretched along the walls in unnatural angles. The lantern flickered, throwing the room into intermittent darkness. I stepped back slowly, keeping my eyes on the reflection. The floorboards groaned under my weight. The air smelled metallic, tainted with cold. A sudden breath hit the back of my neck. Cold. I twisted around. Nothing. The mirror remained, and the figure in it, smiling. I took another step. Another. The reflection mirrored me perfectly. But the smile widened, slower than I moved, deliberate, unnatural. The lantern flickered once more. The fog outside thickened, blanketing the cabin in near darkness. Shapes in the corners shifted, fleeting and tense. Eyes of the forest, unseen but sensed, pressed against the glass. I forced myself to step back. Every movement echoed too loudly in the quiet room. The floorboards protested softly, warning me. The reflection's grin stayed, unblinking, patient. I stopped. Cold pulled along my spine, creeping into my shoulders and down my arms. The fog pressed against the cabin walls, isolating me in a bubble of gray, silent air. I realized the figure hadn't left. Not really. It was bound to the reflection, waiting for me to turn my back again. And as I stared, the mirror shimmered slightly. The glass warped subtly, the corners curling inward as if trying to swallow the room itself. I stepped back once more, heart hammering, hands trembling. The figure remained, grinning, watching, and the fog outside thickened further, swallowing the world I thought I knew. I didn't move. I couldn't, not until I decided which reality was mine, and which belonged to the reflection. Winter arrived overnight, not gently, not gradually. Frost traced the inside of the window in thin white veins, spreading while I watched. My breath fogged the glass, blooming and fading with each shallow inhale. The air near the floor felt cold enough to burn, but above me, near my shoulders, my face, heat lingered. Wrong heat. The lantern burned steady, its pale light trembling only slightly. The cabin smelled sharp now. Cold metal, old wood splitting under pressure. I wrapped my arms around myself. My skin prickled, goosebumps rising and falling without rhythm. The whisper came softly. My name. Not loud, not close. It drifted through a room like breath exhaled by something that didn't need lungs. I froze. The temperature shifted again. The frost on the window thickened, yet sweat gathered at the base of my neck. The air pressed close, heavy and damp. A shadow crossed the frosted glass. Tall, slow, it slid from one side to the other, stretching unnaturally long, before dissolving into nothing. I stepped back. The lantern flickered. Cold fingers brushed my shoulder. Just once. Light. Deliberate. I spun around, heart slamming, breath tearing from my chest. Nothing stood there, but the warmth vanished instantly, replaced by biting cold that sank into my bones. The whisper didn't return. Silence did, and it stayed too long. I heard them before I felt them. Footsteps. Slow. Measured. They circled the cabin, pacing just beyond the walls. Each step landed in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat. Thump. Pause. Thump. The floor vibrated faintly beneath my feet. Dust rattled in the lantern glass. I crept to the window, breath shallow, careful not to disturb the air. Nothing moved outside, only fog, drifting thick and low, swallowing the trees whole. The footsteps continued. Closer now, slower. A low humming joined them, distant and soft, threading to fog like a lullaby meant for something else. I backed away from the glass. The humming followed. When I looked again, nothing. No footprints. No shadows. The footsteps stopped all at once. The silence afterward felt heavier than the sound had been, like pressure against my ears. Leaves rustled faintly in the distance. Then nothing. I found it at the edge of a clearing. A tree split open from root to chest. Its trunk hollowed cleanly, as if something had grown inside it too long. The bark around the opening was smooth, worn down by contact. A faint glow pulsed from within. Soft, steady. The air smelled warmer here. Damp wood, old breath. Shadows shifted inside the hollow, bending and folding over one another. They didn't match the flicker of the light. I felt watched, not from the trees, from the opening itself. Something waited inside, patient, aware. I stepped closer, heart tapping unevenly. The glow brightened slightly, responding. I stopped. The forest around me fell silent again, branches frozen mid-sway. Even the fog seemed hesitant. I stepped back. The glow dimmed. Whatever lived in that hollow knew the distance between us mattered. I left it standing there, breathing quietly, watching me go. The fog thickened until the world narrowed to a few steps in every direction. Sound softened, edges blurred, eyes appeared everywhere, pairs of them, scattered to the mist, hovering at different heights, some low, some far too high. They blinked when I looked directly at them, vanished if I moved closer. Something large shifted somewhere ahead of me, not crashing, not running, moving silently. The forest felt tense, like it was holding something back. My breath sounded too loud, my heart too fast. Then everything stopped. No movement, no eyes. Silence fell so abruptly it made my ears ring. The fog stilled. The forest held its breath. And I knew whatever was here had noticed me noticing it. The humming returned, soft at first, barely there. It threaded through the fog, wrapping itself around my heartbeat until I couldn't tell which was leading anymore. The sound pulled me forward, deeper. Shapes flickered between the trees, tall silhouettes that vanished when I focused. Something shifted above me, unseen, tracking my movement from branch to branch. The humming grew louder, closer. I broke into a run. Branches tore at my sleeves. Cold air scraped my lungs raw. The sound followed effortlessly, never falling behind. The forest twisted around me, trees rearranging subtly, guiding me where it wanted me to go. I slowed, breath ragged. The humming softened again. Satisfied, I stood alone in the fog, chest heaving, skin buzzing with cold and fear. The sound faded into the trees, leaving only its echo behind. And I understood then. The forest wasn't hunting me. It was guiding me, and it wasn't finished yet. The path changed while I walked it. Not suddenly, not all at once. It bent gently at first, curving around familiar trees, the ground worn smooth by old passage. Fog drifted low, brushing my ankles, cool and damp. I followed without thinking. After a while, something felt wrong. The trees began to repeat themselves. A crooked pine with split bark, a fallen log half swallowed by moss. I passed them once. Then again, my steps slowed. The air smelled stale here, like it had been breathed too many times already. The fog thickened, turning every direction into the same pale corridor. I turned left. The clearing appeared. I turned right. The same clearing. No matter which way I walked, the forest guided me back, patient and precise. Shadows stretched impossibly long, pointing inward, funneling me where it wanted me. A quiet understanding settled in. I wasn't lost. I was being kept. The cabin emerged from the fog again, exactly where it shouldn't have been. Its windows glowed faintly, pale against the dark trees. Frost coated the glass, thick and uneven. I approached slowly. That's when I saw the eyes. Two pale shapes stared out from behind the frost, level with my face, unblinking, cold. They vanished the moment I stepped closer. The glass reflected only my own shape, warped and thin. My breath fogged the window, spreading white across it. A low growl vibrated through the floorboards beneath my boots. Not loud, not threatening, claiming. The sound traveled up through the cabin, settling into the walls. Then it stopped. Silence followed, thick and suffocating. I stood there a long time, staring at my reflection, waiting for the eyes to return. They didn't, but I knew they were still watching. Lights appeared between the trees. Small, unsteady. They flickered just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow, hovering at different heights. Too many to count. Lanterns, maybe, or eyes learning a new shape. The fog shifted constantly now, hiding the spaces between the lights. Shapes darted behind them, moving too fast, never staying long enough to understand. My heart beat louder with each step forward. Something brushed my leg. Light! Quick! I gasped and stumbled back, breath catching painfully in my chest. When I looked down, nothing stood there. No mark, no movement. The flickers dimmed all at once, retreating deeper into the fog. The forest felt closer after they were gone, as if disappointed. The forest wouldn't stay still anymore. Leaves rustled without wind, whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. Footsteps echoed close, too close, yet never appeared. Shadows slid across the fog, stretching and snapping back when I turned my head. The ground beneath my feet felt unreliable, shifting subtly with each step. I questioned everything. The path, the cabin, my own breathing. Even silence felt staged, like it was waiting for me to react. I stopped moving. The forest stopped too, for one long moment. Nothing existed except my heartbeat and the feeling of being surrounded. Then the rustling resumed. Closer, intentional. I moved again, unsure whether I was escaping or being led. I saw it standing at the edge of the clearing. Humanoid, tall. Its skin looked pale, almost translucent, blending with the fog around it. Its head tilted slowly, curiously, as if studying an idea of me rather than my shape. It didn't approach. It waited. The air smelled cold and clean there, stripped of forest rot and warmth. Every instinct told me not to move closer. I did anyway. Each step felt heavier, as if the ground resisted. The figure remained perfectly still until I was only a few paces away. Then it dissolved. Not vanished, not fled. It unraveled into fog, its shape thinning and spreading until nothing solid remained. The clearing felt empty again, but the sensation of being watched lingered, heavier than before, more certain. As I turned away, fog closed in behind me, sealing the space. And I knew, even when I couldn't see them, the forest and its shapes were still following. Patient, the crawl space breathed. I noticed it only when I stood still long enough. A faint draft rose from beneath the floorboards, carrying cold air and the smell of wet soil. And whispers. They slipped through the cracks near the walls, soft and layered, overlapping just enough to blur into something almost familiar. My name surfaced again, not spoken all at once, passed between voices that didn't finish it. I knelt slowly, pressing my ear close to the floor. The wood felt colder there, damp. The whispers grew clearer, closer, as if encouraged by my attention. Low humming joined them, vibrating through the boards, settling into my chest. Something shifted below, not walking, not crawling, adjusting. I backed away, heart racing, breath shallow. The whispers followed for a few seconds more, then faded. But they stayed with me, looping quietly in my head, repeating my name long after the space beneath the cabin fell silent. The forest went quiet all at once. No wind brushed the leaves. No insect stirred. Even the fog stopped moving. Silence pressed in from every direction, heavy and absolute. It rang in my ears, loud enough to feel. Shadows stretched between the trees, long and thin, bending toward me as if pulled. Every trunk felt like it hid something just behind it. I took a step. The ground didn't answer. No crunch. No shift. I felt suspended, like the forest had paused with me inside it. Something watched. Everywhere. Not eyes this time. Presence. I stood alone in the quiet, afraid to breathe too deeply, afraid the smallest sound would break whatever fragile balance kept me untouched. The silence held, and I understood then. The forest didn't need noise to be alive. Movement returned in fragments. Figures flickered at the corner of my vision, slipping between trees, appearing where I wasn't looking. Each glance showed something different. A hunched shape, a tall silhouette, something too thin to stand. They never stayed long enough to name. My sense of direction unraveled. Left felt like right. Forward felt like returning. The fog distorted distance, folding space until every path felt equally wrong. My heartbeat thudded unevenly, echoing in places it shouldn't. I slowed, dizzy, unsure whether my feet touched solid ground or memory. The shapes multiplied. Not closer, more frequent. I realized none of them were approaching. They were repositioning. Learning where I looked, a single lantern flickered ahead. Its light cut to the fog in a narrow, trembling line, warm and inviting in a way that made my chest ache. It stood alone, hanging from nothing. I approached cautiously. With every step, shapes formed and dissolved around it, shadows slipping back into the mist as if avoiding the glow. The forest seemed to lean away. A whisper rose from behind me. Not my name this time. A warning. Soft. Urgent. I stopped. The lantern flared briefly, light stretching too far, revealing twisted outlines in the fog. Not trees. Watching. I stumbled back, breath catching, heart pounding painfully. The light dimmed, retreating into something small and distant again. Understanding settled cold and clear. The lantern wasn't guidance. It was bait, and the forest didn't need to chase anymore. I tried to leave at dawn, or what passed for it. Fog swallowed everything familiar. The trail, the cabin, even the sound of my footsteps. Landmarks vanished one by one, erased as soon as I recognized them. Figures appeared at the edges of my vision, never fully forming, always just out of reach. I walked until my legs ached and my thoughts slowed. The forest felt calmer now. Satisfied. Acceptance crept in quietly, not as peace, but as understanding. The shapes no longer rushed. They didn't need to. I stopped fighting the fog. It closed around me gently, cool and damp, filling my lungs, soft against my skin. The whispers faded into something like quiet. The last thing I saw was the faint outline of the cabin door in my mind. The moment I hesitated. The moment I chose wrong. The mist thickened, erasing the path entirely. And as the forest settled around me, patient and whole, one thought remained clear and final. I never should have opened the door.